Hello, Ben. How are you today?
Well, I'm just gonna get things set up here. Turn some video on for you. Switch USB to microphone. Perfect. Yeah, my wife just bought me a podcasting microphone just a couple weeks ago, so I'm excited to be able to use that.
Right on. Right on. Sounds good.
Good, good.
All right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I forgot what episode this is going to be. Don't
Yeah,
worry, I'll have to cut that in later.
no worries. I listened to some good ones this morning, like CK's story. Boy, that was a emotional one.
Yeah, that's a fan favorite episode. So,
Yeah.
all right, where we start? Hey, Ben, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
Well, it's good to meet you. We've been talking, exchanging a few emails back and forth here and there. It's good to meet you. Welcome to the show.
For sure. Thank you for having me. I've definitely really enjoyed ever since you guys launched. Listening through podcasts and audio format is my element because I can participate, I can become educated all while I got my hands full farming.
That's a lot of the same reasons why I like podcasts. I've got like I have an open ear headset. It's like a bone conduction headset that I wear a lot at work, and I'll turn a podcast on and just put my phone in my pocket and I'll have to worry about it because I'm jumping in and out of the gate, or I'm working cows on foot, doing that kind of thing. So I a lot of times I'll run out of battery during the day. so
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you at?
Well, I'm in Nanaimo, which is on Vancouver Island. So this is the traditional territories of the Shtanaimuk people, which is like the Coast Salish people. So the whole Pacific Northwest, the traditional people here were the Shtanaimuk First Nations, part of the Coast Salish area. So I'm on this big rock, which is very unique context because, the rock has about 800,000 people on it, half of which are in Victoria, the province's capital. And so Victoria is kind of across the Straits of Georgia from Seattle. And where I'm at in Nanaimo is across from the city of Vancouver on the mainland.
Okay. They and don't I remember within the last month, haven't you guys had some really rough weather up there and caused some infrastructure problems?
Absolutely. On November 14th and 15th, we had a significant rain event. I mean, considering we're in the rain capital, we had a significant rain event, which the Fraser Valley, which is the breadbasket of the city of Vancouver on the mainland, it was completely flooded out. And don't quote me on these numbers, but we lost 280,000 birds in confinement barns. We lost, I think it was 1,200 pigs. Uh, I think it was about 550 cattle, mostly dairy animals. And then I think it was 120 beehives were lost. And so it was a significant rain event. One of my leases, the river does overflow and we get what we call a pop-up lake. We'll go canoeing on it sometimes. Okay. Nothing more Canadian than canoeing. And so but this year it was deep. It was like completely flooded the entire field, and yeah, it was covering the fence post for sure. Now I'm working up on the top of the field, keeping my animals out of that, knowing that that's a seasonal flood zone. But boy, was it a significant event. A lot of people lost a lot. So I'm grateful that I was prepared.
I know from seeing on social media that there are several places like what is it, Coquihalla Highway?
Correct. That's how we get. Yeah, that's how we get
cut
from
off, right?
the coast to Kamloops, which is like rural territory, and so that's like we're not going home to my wife's family in Kamloops for Christmas because those hours are all cut off. And that's the thing is like for coming into Christmas, like Christmas turkeys or hams, well, the whole Fraser Valley is shut down. So we've lost so much of that opportunity. And then everyone eats Alberta beef, but the highway to the Alberta beef is cut off. So our supply chains have been very disrupted. And so not only did we have the reminder with COVID about supply chain scares, and at the beginning of COVID, when panic buying made the shelves go empty. But now with these floods, we've seen it happen again. Just a reminder that there's many ways that this can happen, that these supply chains can be cut off. And here on Vancouver Island, we're susceptible to that ferry system.
Right.
So all of our food comes across on a barge. And that's what we say about this part of the world is 70 years ago, before World War II, 95% of the food on Vancouver Island was grown on Vancouver Island. We were a net exporter. Before irrigation, Vancouver Island was a hub for apple production. Well, today, 95% of our food is imported. Only 5% of production happens here on Vancouver Island.
Anybody grow apples around there?
They do in small batches, mostly for things like cidery. I met a young couple at a Christmas party over the weekend, and they're starting a cidery with regenerative practices. And so I'm eager to talk more about livestock on their farm.
Okay. So now that we know where you're at, let's learn a little bit about Ben. Where'd you come from, and how'd you? What were kind of the basic steps to get you where you are?
For sure. Well, when I was a child, we mentioned how I just listened to CK's story. And so she had a rough upbringing. And so my father worked for Child Protective Services, CPS, in Wenatchee, Washington. I was born in Seattle, 6 months old, moved to Wenatchee, Washington, which is the apple capital of the world to this day, on the Columbia River there. And my dad was kind of a whistleblower. So, he was advocating for kids like CK, even when the system wasn't allowing the protection to happen. And so that made me move around a lot. So we started in Wenatchee, Washington. And as a little boy, we would walk around the lake and we would pick up the apples and I'd feed them across the fence, or we'd take that ditch grass and feed it across the fence to the overgrazed paddock where the cows or the horses were struggling to find a bite. And so from very, very young, I was getting exposed to livestock. And then just after my second birthday, a coworker of my dad's takes him to the Ellensburg Rodeo. And I'm 2 years old, hyperactive kid. We were up on the balcony. Well, I was at the railing of the balcony and I was dead quiet observing this rodeo. And from that day on, nothing but rodeo, cowboys, ranching. That was all I talked about as a child. And so what's fun is that my childhood play set was these wooden collapsible fences that you could fold up, or you could string them out and put them out to play for the day. Okay. So I've been playing with mobile temporary fencing since I was a toddler. And now I play with it with, polybraid electric wire and Premier One electric nets. So that's where I like to claim my start of pasture management and intensively managed grazing started as a child. So we moved to Canada when I was about 5 years old because of some stuff going on with my dad's work. So that was kind of the adversity in my life, that my dad had to leave a position. And we kind of escaped to Canada because my dad was being wrongfully accused when he was trying to protect families. So we moved to Canada, and we lived in the mainland, kind of between the city and that Fraser Valley area. And I did a lot of horseback riding between the ages of 5 and about 10 years old, 12 years old. And then we moved over here to Vancouver Island. There's not much rural life in Nanaimo specifically. So I was more into cycling, which is what my dad's sport was. But my sister was given up for adoption. My mom did it the hard way. She had my sister when she was in her teens and had me in her 40s. So when I was 13 years old, we hired a private investigator who found my sister, who was living in Houston, Texas. Okay. And so at 14 years old, we went down to visit my sister, and we went to the Houston Stock Show and Rodeo. And so I came home old enough to research on the internet, find a practice pen, buy all my bull riding gear off eBay. And so I had a very short-lived bull riding career, riding steers in junior rodeos, and spent my 15th birthday in the hospital, having been stepped on and lost my spleen. So that ended my livestock rodeo career. However, I still say that I lived out my traveling rodeo cowboy dream because after high school, I became a professional mountain bike rider, riding slope style. So, traveling those long hours in the
What is slope
sedan.
style?
Slope style. So it's the big tricks. So usually it's at a ski hill, and they build a course right on that main front slope. And it's it's a combination of big drops, big jumps, and it's a scored contest.
Okay.
So just like rough stock, I'm traveling long distances for a 30-second run to get scored by the judges and put on a show for a bunch of high
A
risk,
bunch of people
low
that
reward.
just want to see you crash.
Exactly. You got it. So I did that for a number of years, but then started getting injured. So broke my wrist, had a number of surgeries for that. And that encouraged me to go back to school while I was recovering. So I did a 1-year program, mountain biking as a tourism generator. And then I had my first business plan in hand. I was like, all right, I'm ready to make a mountain bike guiding business. Like, well, you probably want more skills. So they sent me to the main campus in North Vancouver, live in the big city. And I did a diploma in outdoor rec and adventure tourism. And then I finished out another 2 years to have a degree in tourism management. Now, I continued getting more and more injuries. And so by the time I was in my last term, I realized I had to move away from my goals of being in the mountain bike industry, that my body was too beat up from that. So I transferred my interest back to agriculture, first finding aquaponics, which was super interesting to me. But aquaponics is super high investment. So of course, aquaponics is land-based fish farming, where you run the wastewater from the fish into a greenhouse. The greenhouse takes up the wastewater, which is nutrition for the plants, and then it cleans the water that can go back to the fish, a closed loop system.
Right.
So, already thinking about biodiversity, ecosystem management. Well, that's really high investment infrastructure, looking at a $250,000 pilot plant and over $1 million in industrial facility. So I worked trying to find investment dollars for that, but kind of got discouraged. So I was looking at different things, and on YouTube, I found first Justin Rhodes talking about pasture poultry, who led me to Joel Salatin, who led me to Wendell Berry, who then took me to Sir Albert Howard, and then backwards through Alan Savory, Alan Nation, and Greg Judy. So I really got my education in regenerative agriculture through podcasts and audiobooks. So we had the opportunity to move back to Vancouver Island. My mom has Alzheimer's, so it was time to get back here. So I went from a tourism position wearing a suit downtown in Vancouver to then a labor position over here, power washing electric motors for all the lumber plants around here. And I could listen to podcasts and audiobooks. So I listened to, in 6 months, I listened to my Stitcher podcast app showed 6 months, 600 hours of content just on podcasts, much less any of the audiobooks I was consuming at the same time. So when I was working in the city there in Vancouver and I wanted to start my first pilot project, I was like, well, could I do pasture poultry here in the city? And we weren't allowed backyard chickens in that neighborhood. So I found the alternative being quail. So I started with the 4 principles for young farmer success that I still use to this day. In fact, that I'm taking not only to farming, but also to building abattoirs or slaughter plants. So first of all is detach the land ownership from the farming. Second is mobile infrastructure. Third is modular infrastructure. And fourth is direct marketing. So when I'm still living in the city, living in a basement suite, I asked my lease owner, hey, can I raise quail in our backyard? And he's like, no, I don't know about that. Young Asian guy, his first house. He was like, oh, I don't want to have the wildlife coming in, and I don't want to upset the neighbors, light bulb. I made a pamphlet up and I go to all the neighbors and I ask, hey, can I put quail in your backyard? And if not in your backyard, would you mind if it was in your neighbor's backyard? And everyone was totally fine with it. Maybe not their yard, but they wouldn't mind. putting wheels on these things and walking them down the street, as well as moving them every day.
You're going to have to back up a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Your
I
audio
got poor
cut
internet.
out the part where just after the pamphlets that you distributed them, and just about everybody was okay with the neighbors having him, even if they weren't okay with having him.
Okay. So I approached all the neighbors, and if they didn't want it in their backyard, they were happy to have the quail in their neighbor's backyard. So I started with one leased backyard, and then the second piece is mobile infrastructure. So I built these little quail tractors to fit in the back of my wife's Nissan Leaf electric car. Well, I measured the 3 feet at the top of the opening, not the bottom of the opening. So they didn't fit in the electric car. So I literally walked them down the road to put them in these backyards, as well as I'd get my suit on every morning. I'd walk down the street and I'd move these quail tractors on my way to the SkyTrain, hop on the SkyTrain into the city, and then I'd stop and feed them again on the way back and give them another move.
That's awesome.
And
that could be one of the coolest things I've heard on this podcast is you walk down the street in your suit and tie to move your quail tractors in suburban backyards on your way to get the train to go downtown to your job.
You got it. And so modular infrastructure, I started with one backyard. I was up to 5 backyards by the end of the year. I was doing batches about 24 birds at a time, brooding them in my laundry room in a Tupperware bin. And so I raised 200 birds over the year, mostly trying to get a egg laying flock. But then any of the meat birds, because they weren't processed in an inspected facility, I gifted them to the landowners, and that was kind of my lease payment. And so every member of each family at least got one quail dinner. And then direct marketing. So there was a car free day, and I got a little market booth at this car free day. And I wasn't allowed to sell meat because I didn't have my health inspected, whatever. So I sold memberships to the Quail Club, which was a punch card that you paid $10 for, which got you your first set of eggs for free. So in a regular egg carton, I would put 3 dozen quail eggs. And on that car free day, I developed 10 customers who then who I then delivered their first eggs for free, and they proceeded to buy every dozen eggs that I could produce.
How much are you getting for a dozen quail eggs?
It was 3 dozen quail eggs in a regular egg carton for $10 Canadian.
Okay.
And meanwhile, you can walk into the superstore and you can buy a dozen and a half for $2, I think, that are out of, an industrial facility in Alberta.
You can get quail eggs in the store in Canada?
Yeah, there's enough of an ethnic population here, a lot of Asians that love the quail eggs.
Huh, interesting. Wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah. And so, but the thing is, Alan Nation's dad says you can only be so weird. You can be a Buddhist or you can be a nudist, but you can't be both. That's too weird. And so as soon as I moved over here to Vancouver Island, I knew I wanted to focus on the big 5: chicken, turkey, lamb, pork, beef. And even lamb, 50% of North Americans haven't even tried lamb, and only 5% consider it part of their regular diet. But for the land services, and especially getting me started with ruminants, that's where I've started with ruminants. So in 2019, I moved here in June. On June 1st, we got into our new home, bought our smallest, tiniest little house we could in town. And then I lease all my farmland 5 minutes because where we are on Vancouver Island, we're squeezed between the ocean, the Georgia Strait, and the mountains, because it's very mountain rocky area. So we're squeezed between the coast and the mountains. So within 5 minutes, I can drive from my house over to the farmland. So I started with a 5-acre lease. And in 2019, did 2 batches of 250 broilers. In 2020, I did 4 batches of 300 broilers, and I did 80 turkeys, and I did my first 6 pigs. And then in 2021 here, the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March, I sold 12 pigs. And just based on the demand for those 12 pigs, I need to raise 60 pigs just to keep up with current demand, much less. Here in May, I lambed out 9 lambs.
I lost your audio right after you said
Oh my gosh.
you'd have to do 60 pigs.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. We'll just go back when we have to, because I'm sitting right next to the modem, but internet sucks.
So you'd have to do 60 pigs based on demand.
Yeah, so based on my current demand, I would have to do 60 pigs just to keep up. So this past year, I did 24 pigs, 1,200 broilers, 300 turkeys, and I started my flock of sheep last year. I bought 6 good ewes from an old lady who, she'd had a closed flock for 30 years, no ivermectin, barely
On the
fed.
island?
Yeah, barely fed any grain, locally adapted. So a great start with 6 ewes, and then I bought a ram from a friend, as well as a ram came with the flock. So I put the ram from my friend in, and then this year I'm putting the ram in that came with the flock to get that good genetics back in. And so I bought 4 more replacement ewes. So I got 14 ewes that I'm breeding this year. So again, for another May lambing. So basically, what I'm trying to do is now apply those principles to a diversified livestock business on lease land. So I have multiple leases now. I have relationships with about 5 families, but I have my 2 primary leases. The original 5 acres that I started on, and then a 50-acre farm that has a bunch going on. So the Nanaimo Food Share is a nonprofit that teaches youth job skills through farming, mostly market gardening. And so on the land that they're not market gardening, the doctor who owns the property, he sees the benefit of regenerative agriculture and is allowing me to graze everything else and have my pigs in the forest. So I've got 5 acres in the top field, 10 acres in the bottom field, that one that we spoke about being flooded. And then I got 4 acres in the woods for the pigs.
Very cool. And it's worth it to mention, like you're talking like 4 acres here and a few acres here. It doesn't sound like a lot to me, but I'm also a guy that needs, 20, 22 acres to keep a cow for a year. So, and I guess it bears to be said that, these small ruminants are a lot more space efficient. You can raise an awful lot of pigs on 5 acres. You could raise a lot of chickens on, thousands and thousands of chickens on 5 acres, right?
You got it. And so here, I think they say about 2 acres per cow, because, we're in a grassy place where it snows for a week. The rest of the time we got green grass on the ground. Jaime Alessandro, I was in a conference with him and was asking about this area, and he's visited here on a vacation. And he said the only time you probably need to feed hay is in February, when maybe there's been some snow on the ground and it's melted and that grass is on the ground molding away. And then you need to throw some hay out there for them. But other than that, should be able to get away with grazing green grass all year long. So my model is basically, it's great to have this interview with you now, because I'm still at the beginning of my journey, the first few chapters. And I'm trying to take this blueprint and lay it out over the next few years. So by 2025, my goal is to have a full-time income of about $75,000 off $200,000 to $250,000 of revenue. And I'm going to do that working below the poultry quota system, so you can get a direct vendor permit for 2,000 broiler chickens or 300 turkeys.
You got to explain the poultry quota system. You got to explain that, because I've never heard of that.
Okay, so the Poultry Marketing Board for the industrial poultry industry, they have this quota system. And so all contract growers for the Lilydale, the Tyson, we have Island Farmhouse is the Vancouver Island version of that. They have quota systems where you have to buy poundage in order to raise those birds. So for the industrial guys, they own a quota that was either grandfathered to them, they bought it off farmer who died, or they've gotten into some new entrance program. And so that's how the poultry industry is regulated in Canada.
Okay.
I don't play with that system, because I'm working below that, because that's the industrial system. You're required to have an industrial barn, basically be on a contract. You have to own the property to put the industrial barn on, all these things that don't apply to what I'm doing.
Is it
So
because of a size thing, or are you just operating in a gray area?
basically, it's all of these safeties that ensure the industrial poultry industry of large scale confinement agriculture and vertically integrated companies. It's kind of the checks and balances around that industry. But what I'm doing, direct marketing and raising birds outside, does not fit any of those regulations. And so that's
I get
why,
that.
yeah. So that's why they have this permit for up to 2,000 broilers per property and up to 300 turkeys per property. So you know what? I am happy with working with that. And I will raise 2,000 broilers. I'll raise 300 turkeys. And then I'll raise those 60 pigs we talked about me needing for my market right now. And then if I market a dozen lambs a year and direct market 6 head of beef, that would give me my full-time income. And that
Okay.
doesn't seem like a lot of animals to someone who knows a lot of animals. But if you're direct marketing at those all at top dollar, that it works out, it pencils out. And the other thing about that is that I can do that on about 15 acres here, 15, 20 acres that I can piece together with a couple of these little properties. Um, and then the other thing about it is that my market currently, like I can't keep up with the farmers. I do one farmers market, which is the Wednesday farmers market. I do 4 restaurants that I give them maybe, uh, like 15, 20% of their chicken, maybe 20% of their pork right now. So I have a lot of room to fill there. And then I work with one butcher shop who, if I raised 1,200 broilers last year, I got them 100 birds or something like that throughout the whole year, just so they could have fresh birds on the counter. And my email list is about 150 people. So I cannot keep up with my current demand, much less if I was to grow demand, then I could produce significantly more. So when my goal is to produce those 1,200 broilers, 300 turkeys, a dozen lambs, 6 beef, and 60 pigs a year, getting to that level would just fill the customers that I have today after 2 years, 3 years of farming here on Vancouver Island. Now, there is certainly opportunities to grow the business more as I grow demand. And that's something I will probably do in order to maybe retire my wife out of the work she does, which is youth work, supporting kids like KC or CK when she was growing up. So my wife would like to transition out of that and maybe work on the farm with those types of kids. So I will certainly grow the business bigger, but I don't need to. And the other thing is we hear a lot about the traditional size of tribes being about 150 people, that humans are engineered to only have strong relationships with about 150 people. So this
Okay.
blueprint that I'm laying out is to build a farm to the scale of one family can produce enough food for 150 people. And then I'm not trying to 10x my company. I'm trying to 10x how many farmers I have in this community. So I want to teach other farmers how to create this model and build the model to feed another 150 people.
Right. And that's kind of one of the things that's difficult sometimes about being in regenerative agriculture is there's no corporate interests haven't found a way in yet to and stay core to the mission of regenerative agriculture. And just like you were saying, if we're regenerative, we want to regenerate communities. And it's not about growing your company as big and as fast as it can. It's about finding the logical size unit and just scaling that to a bunch of different places. We don't, yeah.
The
Yeah.
scale is in the amount of people that we can get to do this, is not in the company size. So, I just want to get some chings in here. So I have not been to Ranching for Profits yet, but I do want to get to Ranching for Profits pretty soon, because I think that mission statement is absolutely, we need to build profits. We need to build a profitable business so that we have those profits to do more good. And so, the Ranching for Profits model, or or any other model where we're creating this kind of freestanding unit where a family can produce enough food for their community, and then we can replicate that by teaching others how to do it. I think that's the future of food, because we're decentralizing the food system. We're creating a craft food system. This is the craft meat industry. And just the way, Temple Grandin said this, Budweiser isn't going anywhere, but craft breweries have made a significant dent and made a huge impact on the economy of the brewing industry. Same as what we're going to do with craft meat. As the regenerative movement grows, craft meat is going to get huge, but Tyson, Cargill, and JBS aren't going anywhere.
Right. And I've had that conversation with several people over the last couple of weeks. The big meat packers, whether we're talking about beef, chicken, pork, they're not going anywhere. Like, they are here to stay. The KFO model is here to stay. Like, we will be old men, and there will probably still be feedlots, chicken barns, and hog houses around, no matter how disgusting we think they are. I think, though, as time goes forward, the people that are invested in those systems and in those methods of production and the consumers of that product, I don't think they're getting any new consumers. And I think it's just, those industries will naturally go away when their customers go away. And I think that over time, their customers are just going to age out and not get replaced. And the new generation of customers is going to want the craft meat, and they're going to want to reconnect with the story of their food, even if it's not meat, even if it's vegetables. So yeah, we've got to live with Tyson and Cargill for a while yet in Smithfield. But the good news is we're not even playing the same game.
The other thing, and this is something that like Hobbs from Sisters Cattle Company says, is like, the price of raising beef the way we do is going to get to a point where it's unsustainable. And so by raising beef the way you and I want to, by the input costs coming down by just using regenerative practices, well, the whole industry is going to convert to that. So, Tyson, JBS, and Cargill, they're going to be killing animals that were raised regeneratively, because that's just what all the farmers are doing.
I can definitely see, I can see things going that direction, especially if input costs keep going up, fuel costs keep going up. Guys just aren't going to be able to afford the inputs. The worry is, like, is it going to hit people like a brick wall, or are enough people going to see it coming that they start getting away from those inputs and it like softens the crash?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to say. And I certainly don't know enough about the traditional beef industry. No, I don't want to say traditional beef industry. I want to say the industrial or the corporate beef industry, and those who are, who are forced to be within that system. Obviously, farmers and ranchers are stubborn, and so I'm sure some will have to fail to learn that rule. But Gabe Brown failed 4 years in a row, and that's what led him to find a new way. And so hopefully more of those people find a new way through their failures before losing the farm and having to do something else altogether. So that's certainly what I hope to see.
The Gabe Brown story of basically being broke and having no other choice. I've heard that repeated several times, other speakers, guys, other big farmers, that's how they got into regenerative agriculture. They just stumbled in it. They failed upward and stumbled into it because they ran out of money to buy inputs and ran out of money to do stuff. And those are some of the best stories, because how, like my friend Josh Hoy says, nature plus one. It's just nature plus one, just little nudges to try to nudge the system instead of brute force with all this diesel fuel and herbicide and pesticide and tillage equipment. Just these little nudges end up making a much bigger difference and a much healthier ecosystem over a long term.
Have you read that book by Dan Griffith, Wild Like the Flowers?
I have not.
That's a good one on regenerative agriculture, and it's like a real emotional path to finding regenerative and how they farm as close with nature as possible. And so his pork system is he feeds them 10% of the grain that I do, because I use the feed conversion ratio of 3.5 pounds of feed per 1 pound of meat like the industry does. He feeds 10%. The hogs take longer to raise, but his production cost, he can sell $3 a pound pork instead of $6 a pound pork because he's got no inputs into them. And so he's mimicking a natural system. He's letting them forage for themselves. Yeah, they grow slower, but it creates a more accessible product, and it creates a more natural farming system, that nature plus one model.
And that was Dan Goodman?
Dan Griffith, I believe it is.
What was the title of that book?
Wild Like the Flowers.
Wild Like the Flowers. I'll try to make sure I put that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm like that in the sense that I started with nothing. I was a broke, university student who, with a broken body, coming out of the mountain bike industry with thinking I'd be building mountain bike parks as my retirement from being a rider. And here I'm broken, so I can't do that no more. So I took farming on as an entrepreneurial endeavor where I could work outside and I could work at my own pace. So that's where I see that these 4 principles for farming are ways that anyone with no money can basically, work a full-time job and get started and start super slowly and grow with their customer base and keep it as minimalistic as possible. Well, the biggest bottleneck for anyone who wants to be a livestock farmer is, what is it?
Capital, money.
Nope.
Place to play.
If you can do it with no money, and if you can do it on lease fund, what are you going to do with those animals? How are you going to direct market?
You need a customer base.
You need processing.
Yes.
So here on Vancouver Island, we went from 5 red meat plants and 5 poultry plants, and one owner on either side died within months of working, and one owner on either side retired with no succession plan because they just wanted out. They were burnt out. And this is since 2018, because we had lost more than that before in 2016 when there was regulation changes and some of these old abattoir owners didn't want to upgrade. And then back in 2006, there was another regulation change that also put a lot of small producers out of business. And so today we have one facility 2 hours south of us across the mountain pass for poultry processing. And we have one 2 hours north of us. And then we have the industrial plant, Island Farmhouse. Those are our 3 options for poultry processing. Now, what's different about driving 2 hours on Vancouver Island compared to driving 2 hours in the middle of America is that when you get on the highway here, it's a 70 mile per hour speed limit, 110 kilometers per hour, and stoplights. So for me to drop my pigs off at the processor in Courtney, 2 hours north of here, I have to go through 7 stoplights from 70 miles an hour to stopped and then back up again. So 2 hours here is a lot more stressful than 4 hours on an interstate highway.
It takes me 2 hours to get to the interstate. So it's life is 2-lane roads going through small towns.
Yeah. So we have barely any slaughter capacity here. So many farmers have stopped raising birds, have stopped raising livestock because there's no processing. So I'm now if I want to grow my farm, I'm going to have to grow slaughter capacity on this island.
Okay.
So I'm taking those 4 concepts that we talked about for farming and I'm applying to a slaughterhouse. So detach the land ownership from the farming. I'm going to find some lease land somewhere. So I'm nimble that I can, if it's the wrong context for the neighborhood, I can move. If the business goes out of business or doesn't work out, I can move. And then I'm not tying up capital in a property and a mortgage. Right. So I'm going to lease some land. The second piece is mobile. So I'm building a poultry plant in a shipping container. And I've got plans for a pork and sheep line in a shipping container. And then we could build a red meat line or like a beef line in a steel building with a concrete floor and build the hanging rails in a cage. So if we ever had to move off this lease property, a steel building is going to be useful for anyone, but we can just pull the cage out and we can move it elsewhere. And then direct marketing. Modular. So modular, I'm building these facilities as small as fiscally feasible. So I can build a poultry plant that slaughters 3 days a week, 300 birds a day. And on those 2 other days, we do cut and wrap. And that is as small as fiscally possible to build a little plant. And then if we outgrow that space, we're not going to grow that facility. We're going to build another one up island or down island or anywhere else that they're needed.
A radius away that, like a service radius away.
Exactly. Wherever people are driving furthest from. And then the last piece is direct marketing. So right now, when I go to Island Farmhouse, the industrial facility here, and drop off my birds there, they give them back to me in a box of 6 birds per box. I can't sell 6 birds per box. I have to literally find another inspected kitchen in order to put those birds into an individual bag just to sell a whole bird, much less cut and wrap. So in my facility, a farmer is going to be able to drop off 100 birds, and they can say, I want 50 of those cut up and I want 50 of them whole. Here's how I want them packaged, and this is what my label and pricing is, so that they can pick up from my abattoir, go straight to market with them, straight to the farmer's market, straight to the grocery store, straight to whatever.
And you would just function as a pass through, just taking the minimum you needed to keep operating out of that revenue stream.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just, competitive prices and to a point where the farmers can make a bunch of money doing this. Basically just exactly what I need for my farm. The numbers pencil out for me, make it work, just the service that I need. But I'm, doing 300 birds a day. That's about 30,000 a year, or 300 birds a day, 3 days a week, 10 months of the year is 30,000 birds a year. And I'm producing 2,000 birds a year, plus some turkeys.
Okay. So you need 50 more guys doing what you're doing to make that work.
So in December of last year, I sent out a survey on pretty intensive, 25, 30 question survey. And I put it on Facebook for 2 weeks. I got 94 respondents, every single one of them saying they are not satisfied with their current processing and that they would be thrilled to be my customer. So I got, and that would absolutely fill the 30,000 birds a year and more, and be ready to go for another facility in this area. And it's the exact same thing on the red meat side. So as soon as I get this poultry plant open, and I've been working really hard since a year now, since November of last year, to get one open, because the one that I've been working at for the last 2 years, well, they closed to the public as of December last year. And then myself and my other colleague, he's been working there for 8 years or so. And so he bought all the equipment to do on-farm slaughter at his own house. And so we've kept going with the same license this year, just for him, myself, and one other farmer.
Okay.
I kind of
want to ask you what like the meat inspection system is like in Canada, because I have no idea what kind of hoops and food police rules you guys have to go through. And I think I've lost Ben's audio again. Are you there?
Hello?
Hey, there you are.
We're back in.
Lost you for another 15 seconds. Okay.
All right.
We'll recycle with that question. So I've been really curious about, what's meat inspection like in Canada? What are your food police rules like up there?
Just like in the US, we have provincial inspection and federal inspection. So federal is CFIA, and that's mostly just big plants. I have not delved into that world yet. I work within the provincial inspected realm. So anything that goes through a provincial plant can be sold within the province.
Okay.
So there's 3 levels of inspection. There is farm gate, which is new regulations that have been slightly modified so that a farm can do 5,000 pounds on their farm with no one on site. You just get a once a year inspection for your area. Then there's Farm Gate Plus, which allows you to do 20,000 pounds. Man, that's not even enough for like my own farm, much less being able to create a fiscally feasible business. So a Class A facility or an abattoir's license is an inspector on site every day that you slaughter, and a inspected quote unquote kitchen by the local health authority. And that's no limits on volume, just limits on where you can sell.
Okay. That farm gate plus, 20,000 pounds, that's not, real significant for the scale you're looking at. But me thinking, average cow calf guy that's generally struggling to pay bills, if he could sell 20,000 pounds of meat direct and not have to go through the barn and the feedlot, that can make a really, really significant difference to the bottom line.
For sure. So for my friend who I work with in the poultry facility, the joke is on Tuesdays we're teammates in the poultry plant, and then on Wednesdays we're competitors at the farmers market. So he is a poultry breeder. That's his thing. And so that 20,000 pounds is enough for him to do everything he needs to do. Now, I'm sure he'll do some of his stuff off the books because of those turkey marketing boards, chicken marketing boards. There's certain gray areas there that that if they have too much control over your breeding flock, then there's securities for libertarian minded people. I'm not going to get into that. That's not my world. I work with inspected meat, and I try to play by the rules and demonstrate how you can be very successful on a small scale with them. So what I'm doing is, because I'm doing the red meat,
to me for a while.
Sure have. So with what I'm doing is, because I'm doing the red meat, that puts me above that 20,000 pounds. And so I'm also trying to create the service for other farmers. Like, there, as an entrepreneur, there is a niche that needs to be filled, and that is slaughter for small farmers. And so if I'm the young guy who's got to do it because all these older people are retiring out of it or literally dying out of it, then hey, I'm gonna do it. It's gonna allow me to grow my farm as large as I want it, and it's also gonna allow a bunch of other people to start on the regenerative path.
Okay.
Let me flip the tables on you. So how do you define regenerative agriculture?
Oh man, I was going to ask you that. It'd be, first you got to pay attention to 6 principles of soil health. Those have to be first. Which is minimize disturbance, bring grazing animals back, no tillage, no herbicides. I'll just go ahead and skip the other 2 because I don't remember what they are right now. Low inputs. If you can't grow it on the ranch, if you can't grow it on the farm, you really need to think, do I need to spend the money to buy this? And I started thinking in things like, how many cull cows does this cost me? So what is regenerative? Things that don't destroy, things that regenerate, things that you're actively working to improve over time. And I realize that regenerative means something a little bit different to everybody. I'm just glad we quit using the term sustainable, honestly, because there wasn't anything good about trying to be sustainable. It's pretty bad and screwed up. Let's make this better.
Yeah, we cannot sustain what we're doing right now.
No. My question is can we sustain it long enough, or not sustain it long enough? Can we switch to regenerative practices fast enough? I guess is the real question that I have.
For me, regenerative comes back to, number one, the context and how the context is different for everyone. And so that's why everyone's definition of regenerative is going to be different, because everyone has a different context. And the context for me is different than my neighbor, is different than you, and our context is different than in India. But the other thing about it is, my context today is certainly different than it will be, tomorrow, or a year from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now, when I want my farming operation to still be going forward. So regenerative is most important about focusing on the context, which is the polar opposite of the industrial system, where they're trying to fit everyone into the same context. And so there's another new book on regenerative agriculture that just came out on Audible. and it's called One Size Fits None. And it's in regenerative, we focus on.
You dropped out there just after you said the title of the new book. So start back over with the new regenerative. Another regenerative book just came out on Audible.
Another regenerative agriculture book just came out on Audible, and it's called One Size Fits None. And I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it's about her growing up on a cattle operation and thinking it was the norm, her being a writer for the ag industry, and then discovering regenerative and how there is so much a better way, because everyone's failing at industrial agriculture because the industry is trying to force everyone into the same context, versus regenerative agriculture, where we honor, we respect, and we really flourish by respecting that everyone's context is going to be different.
So I'll drag up a term that I learned in that school that shall not be named, or not a term, but let's say a concept. I will call it the Pareto principle. So the Pareto principle basically says that 80% of your result comes from 20% of your effort, and that 80% of your effort is responsible for 20% of your result. And I like that ratio. Okay. And I'm thinking about it in the terms of shared context. So we can all agree on this shared context of regenerative agriculture. And as long as we're seeing eye to eye on about 80% of it, I think that's a pretty good place to be. And I think that's probably close enough for everybody. And, you know, now that we say context, and we've said it about a half a dozen times, that's usually the sixth principle of soil health that gets tacked on there at the end, is know your context. Because what's regenerative and what's contextually appropriate for me here might not work on Vancouver Island. But the principles of regenerative agriculture are going to generally remain the same no matter where you are on this floating rock.
Right. And that also lends to how this is very complex. It's not complicated. Complicated is putting someone on the moon. We can control every variable in that, but in ecosystem management or in social structures, like the social work that my dad and my wife do, there is always a moving variable. When we're out in the field working with animals, there's always a moving variable. And so that's why it's a very contextually complex thing. And that's why we have to very much honor the difference. And in the industrial model, again, the polar opposite, they are trying to control every single movement, every single element, have no moving variables.
80% doesn't fit in an industrial model. Like they want that 99 or 98%. Like you can't just, does that make sense what I'm saying? Like
it absolutely does. Yeah. And I love that you brought up Pareto's principle, because I live by it, because I do 5 things. I have a pastured poultry production system. I have a forest pork system. I have a grazing system, and I have a meat marketing business, and I'm building abattoirs. And so I am doing all of those at a B minus 80%, because I spend 20% of my time on each, but I only get a B minus because I'm only doing 80%. Now I'm achieving 400 times what I would if I was just focusing on one of those things and achieving 100% at it.
Right.
But I do have some loose ends. And so that's where I want to develop an internship program to get some help. And what I'll do is, with these interns, I'm not going to give them the grunt work. I'm good at the grunt work. Yes, they'll do some chores to learn every aspect of what I have going on, but I want them to focus on is all those additional things. Like I want them to get going on pasture map, because that's something that I can't do to get to 100%. So I want them to focus on all those 20% tasks to get us to the 100% of the goal. I want them to focus on that, so that when they go on to their own operation and they're doing the work that I am, that 80% of the work with 20% of my time, well, they already have the practice, the knowledge, the know-how. They know what that additional stuff is to get them ahead of where I can be right now.
Well, tell me a little bit more about your internship program. You're still developing that?
Yeah, it's something that I would like to get going for next year, but I've been very focused with the computer time that I have to be working on building the abattoir. But I would like to have 2 interns come the beginning of the year, just before my first set of broilers show up. And then I would give, it would be a unpaid internship, but they would get a position in the poultry plant. So if they need some living expenses, they can work in the poultry plant to learn that side of things and get a paycheck that way. But they would stay with me for about 9 months and work through what it means to be a regenerative rancher. And the goal would be that they spend a year with me and then they're ready to go to build their own operation with confidence. And so what I say is I'm building my farm without taking any debt. Everything's just cash flow and, a couple little, $3,000, $4,000 credit cards that just cash flow feed bills. So what I want them to do is to be able to come out, either come into the internship with a nest egg ready to build their own farm, or come into the internship and when they're done, they have the confidence to go get a loan and build a farm and jump to that level where I'm working towards to have a full-time income doing this. So I figure there's 4 ways to get into farming and ranching. First, you're born into it. Secondly, you go to ag school and get a degree in it, the way CK did. Third, you spend a lot of time working for free, interning, volunteering, and you learn on someone else's dime.
If you grow up on a ranch, you spend a lot of time working for free.
Yeah, similar concept, right?
Experience.
And the 4th way is the way I'm doing it, whereas you dump all your time and money into it and learn all your own mistakes.
I'm doing a little bit of that too.
I think we all do.
That's
to a certain extent, we're all somewhere in between a couple of those.
Look, you pay for an education no matter what. Okay. Just because I don't have a piece of paper on a wall with the name of a university at the top, that doesn't mean that I haven't paid large sums of money for the education that's in my head. Education about how the land works, education about how to deal with people, education about cattle. Whether or not does it make sense what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of education. And even if you're learning some of these hard lessons in livestock or, in how to build an abattoir or how to, what a proper quail enclosure looks like, you're going to pay money for that knowledge one way or the other.
You got it. Absolutely. I've had a couple big learning experiences that I paid dearly for. One, it looks like I might lose a lease that I've been working towards working out for the future. And so I've already invested some money in permits and legal fees to get stuff set up, and about 8 months of going through a permitting. And then I've lost money on this past year on my birthday, June 29th. We had the heat dome up here, and batch of pigs. Hi.
Pick it back up with your birthday.
Okay. So then on my birthday, had a water failure. We had the heat dome, and a water system failed when I was up working at the poultry plant, so I didn't catch it. And I took 280 kilograms of 8-week-old, 7-pound massive broilers dead to the dump. And my first batch of pigs, a half hog that I was trying to save fresh in a refrigerator, and it was wrapped up. And by the time I came back to it a few days later, it went bad. So that went in a hole. You pay for these things because you make do with what you got until you've got what you need. And that's as much in infrastructure and equipment as it is in knowledge and experience.
And just like, that good infrastructure, it costs a lot of money. And sometimes you've got to gain some experience with less than optimal infrastructure before you have the money to buy the good infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just learning from mistakes, that's all you can do is just learn and move forward, not get discouraged. And tenacity and dedication is about the best you can do to get started in this industry. And so, it's similar in my mountain bike career. Like I figured if we were there just riding at the jumps and just practicing, just hanging out with buddies, that if I did more runs than absolutely everyone there every single day, that I would come out ahead. And it's the same as this. Every day you go out and you do your chores, that is one rep. And every set is like at the gym, a set. Well, that's every season or every year or every batch of poultry or batch of hogs or whatever. That's a set, and every day of chores is a rep. And we're just working out, building these muscles, building these farming muscles, building these business skill muscles.
I can see that. I was just sitting here thinking been talking about mountain biking, and I've never I'm not much of a biker. I never have been. I mean, you can see the background. This is what my pastures look like. You don't really ride bicycles across there. However, so some people might have heard of a bike race called the Dirty Kansas. It's held over in eastern Kansas in the Flint Hills. It's like 200 kilometers or 150 kilometers bike race. Dig it?
Yeah.
A few years ago, um, what's turned into it's called the Open Range Gravel Race, Open Range 200K, and part of it comes across my ranch. And last year I had 7.5 miles of road across the ranch. And we're talking everything. Like the best I sent them down was a 2-track. I sent them down some fairly decent 2-track roads, some pasture trails, and then there are a couple places to connect things. I just took my skid steer and my mower and mowed a path right through the pasture. Like,
wonderful.
Didn't even drive to knock it down. So they call it grassful. Instead of gravel, they call it grassful when I just mow a trail through the pasture. So this year, we should be having a course planning meeting. Eric should be down soon, and we're going to start working on planning the course out for next year. I'm not sure how many miles he's going to give me, but he has promised me more miles this year. So we're going to hopefully go from 7.5 and maybe look a little closer to about 12 and 5 or 6 creek crossings if I can be mean enough to them.
Wonderful.
And when I say creek crossing, I mean like they would have to ride up, stop, get off, and carry the bicycle across. You're definitely getting wet on this ride.
Well, you're going to have to give me a call before you start doing that planning, because as part of my outdoor rec adventure tourism certificate, I got a degree I got certificates both in 2 classes of trail building. And then I went on to build mountain bike trails and parks with the instructor from there. So my summer jobs through university was building these mountain bike parks all across Canada. And I can tell you from building, both courses for races and building trails, that mowing a pasture and having to trudge through grass is torture. So make sure you put a lot more of that in.
I try to mow it as short as I can, but it only goes so short. And those guys with those big fat tire bikes, like the guy, it's 200 kilometers, right? And there's a lot of it that's sand. It's basically county roads that are pretty fine sand. So there'll be a lot of guys that, they'll look at some of the route and be like, oh, I'll bring my fat tire bike. And they'll bring, a bike with like a 3 or 4 inch wide tire, which is great until you get in the grass, and then they hate it. And we had a guy a couple years ago rode a fixie on that race.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I see the ranch is usually, I'm before halfway on the 200K. Like I'm around like kilometer number 75, I think is about where I'm at, where they usually enter off of. And it was like kilometer 92 going off. And I saw him, and he was in pain. he was hurting because I think it was about the fifth or sixth hill that I'd made him climb at 180 feet a shot.
Okay, so just for our listeners who don't know what a fixie is, it's this fad where you ride a bike with no free coaster. So you cannot coast. It's got a fixed crank to the hub. And so these bikes are originated on the board tracks. And then kids in San Francisco started riding them on the streets. And then it was a fad. So then we're applying fixed gears to everything. So there's no coasting and you're on a single speed. And so trying to trudge through every condition that Kansas can throw at you on a fixed gear is literal recreational torture.
Yeah, that was I think it was 2020 or maybe it was 2019 that he did that. And I know he came back for the race this year and he was not on a fixie this year.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
I think he had a real bike this year. But, oh, it's really cool. And I get a lot of people ask me like, well, that's a lot of work to put in. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Yeah, there's some cost in going out, the diesel fuel to go out and mow and mark and do whatever. But I look at it this way. I've got a pretty cool place. And what better way to share it with a really diverse group of people than to let them ride their bicycles across? I mean, I know I don't have to tell you, but there were probably at least 25 or 28 states represented in last year's race. There were even several foreign countries. Like there were several sponsored riders. I think there was even a guy that rides for Red Bull that came out. Some other bike names. Anyway, it's really neat to be able to share, the beauty of the Red Hills and the beauty of Kansas with people from all over. And they're not zipping through in a Jeep. They're not blasting through in a side-by-side. They're not going through in a car or motorcycle. They're on a bicycle. It's just them, the wind, other people on the bikes out on the prairie, and they're there to experience nature. And I think there's something really cool about that. So every year I get to meet, 100, 150, sometimes 200 new friends as they ride across the ranch. And I think that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And, what we do is we're educating people on this industry, on what we do. And because we do something so different than the norm, that we really need to tell people about it. So in my degree, thinking I build businesses in mountain biking, well, I switched my interest back to agriculture before my last term at university. So my graduating thesis was connecting aquaponics with tourism. And I had to convince my instructors to let me do this. But my findings were that no one knows what aquaponics is, the same way no one knows what regenerative agriculture is. And so we need to educate, and that's how we will sell our product, is by, educating through farm tours, tourism, and events like you're doing with this cycling event, whether it's being at the farmer's market, being direct to the customer, being face-to-face with the person buying so you can tell the story. We're selling stories. Or by education, by having, I'm going to have elementary school kids coming to do farm tours next year, from preschool to doctorate research. Education in every type of, every sense of the institutional education system can be involved on our ranches. I've got a master's student who's doing the connection between emotional intelligence and regenerative soil health. And that's what her research is. And so she did soil tests and is doing a number of surveys with myself and a bunch of other farmers across this province. So by you doing this event with the cyclist, there's so much crossover between cyclists and regenerative agriculture because they get it. They're health conscious. They care about the environment and they want a cool story and aren't afraid of hard work.
Your comment, you're like, they care about what they eat. They care about nutrition. You're not wrong, but I also think that, maybe they might be looking at nutrition through an outdated paradigm. I mean,
everyone is.
I don't want this to sound bad. I don't want this to sound like I found a bunch of trash. Okay. Like, look, I had 150 people come across 7.5 miles of my rough ass ranch on bicycles. Okay. I found like a couple granola bar wrappers, a couple energy gel packet things, and a couple of water bottles. it's not a big deal. Like, I guarantee you there's more trash that gets thrown out in the 4 miles of highway that run through the ranch than those guys left. But like, I don't know.
Okay, but you got to give them that they're in their big race, so they want to pretend like they're the Olympic athlete who, all the attention's on them. They can do
doing the
whatever they
thing
need to,
because
right?
they think it's going to give an advantage and keep the energy level up. But
Yeah, they want to do the Tour de France thing where they run by the guy holding the cup out, slam that cup and toss it on the ground, and then someone's going to grab it and hope that they sign it later, right? It's their moment of glory. Of course, it's disrespectful and they know better, but
oh no. Like they tried it. I've never seen anybody drop anything on purpose or throw anything down. Like they're this group is super awesome. Like, they'll eat something, they stuff it in their pocket. Like, I've even seen stuff fall off of bikes or fall out of pockets and they keep going. Like, nobody wants to drop a full water bottle. Those bicycling water bottles are freaking expensive. Nobody wants to drop one on.
Unless you're competing super hard and you have finished that bottle and you want to drop the weight, so you just leave it wherever you finished it and you go on to your next bottle. But I think the thing is, like,
this isn't that kind of group.
There's a time and a place, and probably when they're on your ranch is not the place to be dropping that. But when they're passing by the pit station, that's where you drop it, where there's a course marshal who's going to pick up after it. But it's kind of the same thing with, like, with agriculture and stuff. There's a time and a place for grazing. Mowing down the Amazon forest to create pasture land is not the right place. But here on Vancouver Island, areas that have been cleared since the settlers have been here and it has been in pasture for the last 150 years. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a great place to be grazing, and absolutely where you're at, great place to be grazing. So both time and place, and that applies to so many things. Of course, going back to our context conversation, right?
Yeah. And I was just thinking, I've been saying this on the podcast, and it seems like I say it all the time, but I realize that these episodes are spaced out, one a week or so. But like, you're talking about ranching on cleared forest ground, and you've got some forest ground to run pigs on. I don't have any understanding of that kind of contextual management, as my management context is grasslands. And so say the ranch it's at least 80% old growth grassland and 100% native range. And the difference is, native range you can reestablish after you've been farmed, because that's just describing the native variety of plants, the native variety of forages that are out there on the land. But if you use a term like old growth grasslands, similar to talking about an old growth forest, an old growth forest has never been disturbed, right?
Right.
An old growth grassland likewise hasn't been disturbed, because grazing animals, when they're properly managed, is not a disturbance.
Right. It's a challenge for me because I want to honor the indigenous roots here, because when the settlers came to Victoria, they could not believe the grasslands and the meadows. They thought it was beautiful. It looked like England, where they grazed ruminants and things like that. But it was because that the grounds were being managed by selective burning, and the First Nations left it as this, it looked natural to the Westerners, but in fact it was very well managed. And so that's a big mission for me moving forward, is to learn as much as I can about indigenous management of these areas. Because when I describe my pigs in the forest, I describe it as participating with nature the same way a herd of elk moving through this forest would have. Today we have elk herds of, like, I think there's 30 and a herd of 40 on the island. But a couple hundred years ago, it would have been hundreds of animals. So when a couple of hundred animals come through the forest and bed down for the night, they're going to do some disruption. They're going to do some disturbance, have an impact. So we're participating in nature by creating that impact and then moving the pigs on. And so, I play a lot with edge effect. The edge effect, of course, is where there's most biodiversity, whether it's the edge
Are we here?
Yeah, I'm back.
Gonna have to back up and start over with edge effect.
Okay. So we talk about a lot, or in regenerative agriculture, we talk about the edge effect. So the most biodiversity is found at the edge of the ocean and the shore, the estuaries, the riverbank, the edge between forest and pasture. And I also play with the edge between suburban and rural properties. And so playing with this edge, I think about, native species and how could I replant old growth forests? But at this, sorry, we're back.
Yeah,
Oh
we
my
got it back.
gosh.
Yeah, something's going on with the audio today. Got to back up to old growth forests.
Okay. And so you got the whole edge effect, and now we're on to old growth, you think?
Yes.
Okay, let me just see if I could set up a phone hotspot, if that would help any. Okay, on.
I recorded one of these on Monday with Sage Askin from Wyoming, and he was actually coming through. So I borrowed a friend's podcast studio, and we got to do one face to face, and that was a lot of fun. That was awesome.
You now. Oh, hello. Are we back?
We're back. I think we're back.
Perfect. Okay, now I'm the Bluetooth hotspots. Hopefully, it's going to work a lot better. You had just said you interviewed Sage in Wyoming.
Yeah. I was talking. So I'll probably edit this out, but Monday, my friend Sage Askin was traveling through, and he wanted to come down and see the ranch. So we went out and showed him. Drove around cows, drove around the ranch for about 4 or 5 hours, then toured up to Pratt, and I borrowed my friend's studio to do a podcast, and we did it in person. I tell you, that was a lot of fun. it was a lot of fun to do it in person. So
yeah, with the radio show I do, I usually just record it and then send it in. But we did one show live in studio, and we're going to do the next 2 shows before Christmas live in studio. So I got that coming tomorrow on Thursday. Excited about that.
I've done a couple of live radio shows. Well, I've done the same one twice, and it's a 2-hour deal, and you've listened to a lot of my episodes, and I try to keep them, try to get out there, an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's totally different. Like when you're trying to do an ad break, and it puts you in a different mindset when you're live, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I know I can't say that because there's no chance to go back and edit that out, and you're more conscious about, stumbling over yourself or filler words. Whereas, format like this, I can go pull a bunch of that stuff out. Not that I usually do, but I can.
Yeah, for sure. All right, back to old growth forests.
Yes.
I get criticism from some people who ask, why don't you try and replant trees into an old growth forest? Instead, you're talking about grass management, but our natural ecosystem is not a grass-based model compared to where you are, Brian. And I say, yes, but we have established pastures here, and pasture and grass production can sequester carbon at a wonderfully beneficial, huge amount. And so I will focus on that, but also be replanting old growth forests. So creating more edge effect by planting trees in ways that in the future that will turn into shade for my animals or fodder for my animals. And so it's a combination. I'm also trying to change the microbiome by refertilizing these fields that either have been hayed for decades or that have been neglected and abandoned for decades. Like what I do in the forest with the pigs is I go in there, I create the disruption, And I also fertilize. So I have not gotten into any planting, whether it's on my pastures or in the forest. I am just in the observation stage, as they would say in permaculture, where I am going to see what comes back. I'm going to see what species, once I change that microbiome by adding the fertility, by rotating my ruminant animals who have never seen ivermectin, by having the cake effect of the pastured poultry moving across the fields, creates that protective insulated layer that then 2 weeks later, this green grass comes punching through. We're changing the biome and allowing the pre-existing latent seed bank to come back. They say seeds as old as 100 years old, when they have the right environment, will come back. So I can be accessing the historic seed bank by just changing that ecosystem within the soil surface.
It kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with another friend this morning. As we were talking about how we're supplementing and managing our pastures through this winter, because it's a little bit of a challenging winter. I'm not going to say it's cold, because it's not. It's pretty warm, but we haven't had any moisture. So, like, if I can get good moisture anytime in the fall, I'll grow a bunch of good cool season grass. I don't have it right now because it's been so dry. It's been dry for almost 2 months. So I'm having to supplement with a bunch of alfalfa, so the cows get some protein and they can use the dry cured pasture grass. And we're talking about, different supplementation strategies. And the more I want to stick to being regenerative and low input and keep my cows on that low input program, alfalfa might be the best they're going to get. And hopefully I can manage for some of those cool season grasses and encourage them to grow from the seed bank. Because like you said, the seed bank here in my deep prairie soils, there could be 50,000 viable seeds per cubic meter of soil. And that just blows my mind. Like, every species that you could possibly want in your pasture is probably already there, just in seed form. All you have to do is create the correct conditions of fertility and climate for that seed to germinate, take root, and sprout.
Absolutely. And it's just a matter of returning to participating with nature. Ever since reading that book we mentioned earlier by Dan Griffith, Wild Like the Flowers, he says he doesn't like the term mimicking nature. We're not mimicking it. This isn't a controlled science experiment. We are participating with it. We are out in nature participating with it. And so by participating with our livestock in a way to create those deep roots, that deep organic matter, that we're going to access that seed bank that's already there. It's just another example of how regenerative practice will reduce the input costs. There's a 12-acre lease. I bought a bunch of hay off this family, and well, it's not a lease yet, but I've approached the family saying, what are you paying for fertilizer? And what are you paying for diesel to be haying that off? And this is all just so that you can get your farm tax. Well, how about I save you all that labor, all of that diesel, all of the hassle of having to sell that hay, and I'll fertilize it for free. So you're going to have a green pasture, and you're going to have some animals out there, and you're going to get your farm tax, and I'm probably going to feed you some really good food at the same time. So, there's so much opportunity, especially in a place like this, for lease land. And by approaching the lease land, because it's not a huge monetary gain to a family to be leasing the farmland out, that it needs to be a land services message that we're offering in order to.
That's a great point. That's a great point. For these small acreages, make it less about the money and more about the service you're providing.
Right, because the when I moved to Vancouver Island here, or even before I did, so it would have been Christmas 2018, I met up with Asia Jones Martin of the Young Agrarians. And so that's an organization in Canada that helps young farmers connect with landowners, as well as a number of other programs that they have. They have a business boot camp right now. And I asked Asia, I was like, so I don't even know what the going rate for lease land is around here. She's like, oh, well, for, good market garden land with water, electricity and maybe some fence, it's usually 200 to 350 per acre. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm going to be paying about, if I want 5 acres to start pasture poultry, I'm going to be paying about $1,000 a month. I guess I could work that. She's like, no, not per month. Lease is annual. And I was like, really?
What?
So you're saying for $1,000 a year, I can be on 5 acres. Meanwhile, our real estate market here in British Columbia is some of the highest in the world. Vancouver, the big city, has been announced as the most expensive real estate in the world lately. And so for me to get 5 acres of bare land with no amenities, it would be $250,000. And so I'd have a mortgage of $1,200 a month, much less leasing these properties for $1,000 a year. And not only that, but this is a huge retirement community because everyone from the mainland retires over to the Vancouver Island. So a ton of retirees own these little estates that they can't manage, especially as they're aging. And so it's an opportunity for young farmers to come in, which also gives them the opportunity, the farmer, to build their business so that by the time that that elderly person is ready to sell their property, that the young person has built their business to a point where they can leverage against their business cash flow in order to secure the property and purchase it outright after they've been operating for 5-10 years. And so, it's a similar opportunity with COVID and what we've seen around work from home. And so young people my age in their 30s and 20s and 30s on the mainland who have these professional positions, they've always wanted to move to Vancouver Island and buy a little homestead or something like that. Well, now with the ability to work from home, they can move to Vancouver Island, they can buy that property, but they don't necessarily have the time to farm it, but they support regenerative agriculture and the movement. So now, the people in the city that are laborers, they can move here and then they can lease, and they can lease from the young professionals who own the property. And in a partnership, they can get these small acreages back into production. And for someone like myself doing regenerative agriculture with livestock, I can link together a couple of these properties. Like the 50-acre property that I'm on can connect to the 7 acres where the neighbor also raises St. Croix sheep like I do. And then we could walk up this little driveway, across the road and down the little side street cul-de-sac to my original 5-acre lease. And then through my dog trainer has 7 acres of forest. I could raise some pigs in there, and that connects across the corner of my friend's property onto a 35-acre grazable pasture field that used to be an old dairy that has nothing's been done with it for 15 years. So I could connect about 100 acres of land on 7 properties within this neighborhood, and I could walk the animals across it, all with some of those properties within city limits, all 5 minutes from downtown here on Vancouver Island. And so if that's what I can do, squeezed between the ocean and the mountains, man, I can't imagine what you could do anywhere more open than this.
Yeah. But then there's the question of market, of how far do you have to go to a market? And for where I'm at, yeah, it seems like I have a lot of land, I have a lot of resource, but what I don't have is population density anywhere within a reasonable distance, right? So I have to look, I'm looking at some different models, but maybe I'll get into that later at a different episode. Having a market and being close to a market is very important, because if nobody, you can have the best stuff in the world, but if only 3 people within 2 hours drive want it, you don't really have much of a market for it. But if you have a city like Vancouver, or you have, or you're close to it where, you're getting a bunch of, let's call them expats that are coming out of the city, trying to escape their filing cabinets for yuppies, or filing cabinets for millennials, whatever they are this year. They're trying to get back out, get to the land and do this remote work. And then, you have some, a laid off laborer comes out, says, hey, I can do quail and chickens and goats in everybody's backyards, and gets that started up. There's still, we're still talking about having a density of population that's not very common out here on the plains, I guess is what I'm getting at. So being close to an urban environment, being able to take advantage of some of those things. Um, who was it? Another episode we did? I think that was Brittany Cole Bush in the Ojai Valley of California. Does something very similar to what you're doing, but she does a lot with sheep and goats.
Right. And of course she also has the market, even though I don't believe she's accessed it yet because she hasn't started harvesting her flock. She's just growing it. So she has more ability to manage land. And so, I think it goes back to things that Mike Calicrate has said on your podcast around the food hubs. And so, or not necessarily food hubs, but public markets.
Right.
And so, there's enough people in the cities in that are getting passionate about regenerative agriculture, but because their partner has a city job where they're fixed, they want to, or their city people want to stay in the city, but they want to be participating in the regenerative agriculture movement. And so that's the opportunity where you partner with someone on a marketing business that is in town, and you're just the producer for them. But because you're direct marketing, because it's this partnership, that you have equity in the marketing business that allows you to get more of that food dollar, but allows you to be out in the middle of nowhere managing the ground that we need to be managed appropriately with ruminants, because it's equally as important to have those rural, far distant places managed. Like, my big, hairy, audacious goal is to live out my childhood dream of being a rancher horseback every day. And the way I see doing that is pairing my tourism degree with my love of moving animals daily. So, I buy a 100, 200 acre home base in the interior, many miles from any big urban city, but we build a guest ranch there. And so, I always describe this as the traditional model, as Greg Judy would say, the Columbus method of range management is you turn the cows out in the spring, and then you hire a bunch of cowboys to go wrangle those ornery cows that haven't seen humans in 6 months and bring them back out of the mountain. So it's a big cattle drive once a year. So if we're trying to move these animals daily, well, you can't be hiring $300 a day workers, day cowboys. So instead, what we do,
I'm gonna have to edit that out, man. Like,
oh,
you gotta drop that number. Guys around here work a lot cheaper.
All right. Well, what we need to do is we need to create this experience where we have a couple good cowboys, and we have translators who speak Asian languages and European languages and South American languages, so that we bring the businessmen and their families to the ranch. They get the ranch experience. We saddle them up every morning and we send them up into the hills, where we have a very tame set of cows that knows the routine, moves every day, because we don't have to drive them all the way back to town. We have to just move them from here to there. So we load up the guests on their horses. We run them up into the hills. We have breakfast on the range. We move the cows from here to here, just a small move. And then they have lunch on the range and they come back for the rest of the afternoon. And so this is a way to create a profit center out of moving the cows, instead of it being an expense of moving the cows on a large scale, on a much larger scale than what I can do in an urban center. And so this is how still I would want to be a couple hours from an airport. This isn't going to work everywhere.
Right.
But this is just one of the many models on how you could incorporate more into this is the model that I would like to take to do regenerative management on a large scale, on thousands of acres, not dozens of acres like I do today.
It's scaling is the question. It's scaling, and it's bringing more people on board and letting them have a little piece.
So one model that I have, I've been entertaining, is the kind of like the cow share model. So families who really want to get involved with regenerative agriculture, and they want to literally invest in regenerative agriculture, well, I'm selling them stocks, not stocks and bonds, but livestock. And so a family can buy a ewe, for example, for $250, and they pay a service fee, which is, it's my custom grazing. So it's my custom grazing offering, where they pay, 50 cents a day to keep a sheep. And then their stock, when that ewe drops a lamb, Well, their stock is either giving them a dividend. If it's a ram lamb, then Glassen Farms is going to buy that for the meat herd. Or if that drops a ewe lamb, then it's their stock is splitting. And so now they have two ewes to breed back next year. And so this is a model that would allow me to grow my farm faster. So allow me to scale up my ruminant herd, because I would do this with ewes and I would also do this with cows in order to scale up my breeding herd faster than I can on my own dollar. And it involves families getting involved to feeling like they have ownership. You know, the BC Cattlemen's Association, you need to own 3 cows to be a member. So anyone could buy 3 cows that I'm managing within this system, and they can now be a part of the Cattlemen's Association. And so this is a way for people to allow us to scale. It's just one example of a way you can scale a business on someone else's dollar, getting families and people interested in regenerative agriculture. And you can bet that that person who owns an animal in your herd is going to be the loudest advocate in the city, teaching people about your product, probably selling those meat animals that come out of theirs, right? So it's a great opportunity. Just another interesting route.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, somebody that let's take our stereotypical cube farm dweller that lives in a filing cabinet for yuppies and millennials, buys 3 cows, joins the Cattlemen's Association. Then they get their first box of meat. They think it's just absolutely amazing and delicious. You have a true believer there.
100%.
Like, not just a customer. You have a true believer there.
Exactly. You have a business partner who is pushing it like your business is their own. And, you know, this isn't something that I invented. This is something that Greg Judy does with his landowners, that they have the opportunity to buy into his herd.
Well, I'm just thinking the most important thing for people to have in their food system is buy-in, like emotional buy-in.
Yeah.
And that this is, you know, that seems like a really good way to make sure that we get more people, not just producers, we get consumers emotionally bought in to the production practice.
Absolutely. And then the consumer also has the feeling of being the producer. They have ownership of being part of the production. And so, you know, it's a very strong means of getting people involved, even city people, to be involved in your operation. And then through our storytelling, whether it's people hearing about your farm through your listening to your podcast or through our social media, or like for me, Clubhouse is my favorite place to speak on these things, and being able to share these stories. Well, those are now their stories. As much as being a customer to our farm, they're absolutely, I always say the customer of the regenerative farm is the most important part, that they are the heroes of the regenerative movement, because we farmers cannot do what we do without the customer. But taking it to the next step and allowing the customer to become a producer, just all the more buy-in, all the more conviction, all the more food security, because if anything was to happen, well, they got their name on that cow. They can, you know, let's all shut her down over here together and
Cash out their
hunker
stock.
down. Exactly. Cash out your stock or continue eating off your stock despite whatever happens in the market. And that's the other thing is, okay, so yes, you can have a dividend split when you have another baby cow or ewe, or you can have a dividend return with a steer calf or a ram lamb, or you say, I'm going to save that one out, and at the end of the year, I'll pay for the processing, and that one's going in my own freezer. So it's just a really cool model that I want to entertain and kind of do a marketing campaign around. Like, in order to start my poultry business, I did a crowdfunding campaign. And as much as in a crowdfunding campaign, I had things like stickers and farm tours and t-shirts that people could buy, no one bought that stuff. Everyone they just pre-purchased chickens. Everyone pre-purchased chickens, and I sold out my entire first batch. It was the Kickstarter I need. That was the goal, was to sell chickens, and I was doing these other things just cause, and no one was interested in the other things. They bought chickens. And so I would like to run another crowdfunding campaign now that I've scaled my business up, where now I'll sell things like CSA memberships. So I sell 25 chickens and you take them as you need them through the poultry season. I can pre-sell half hogs. And then I can sell the livestock, sell these ewes, sell these cows, and then I think that'll be how I'll get into the cattle industry, is because it's a big investment to start up. But if I have this help and buy-in, for me, as I say, like, in order for my meat marketing business to work out, all I need is to sell 6 head of beef a year. And so, it's not a stretch to sell cows to other people, and to, say I sell a dozen cows, I can assume I'm going to get my 6 steer calves back, and my meat marketing business, the numbers work out. I'm grazing cattle. I'm doing better beneficial impact on more acres with cattle. It's a way to start. It's just another unique way of getting into this industry with no money and no experience, and just doing it, and just finding a unique way to do it, just breaking down those barriers to entry.
And that was, that's one of the themes that I wanted to talk to you about, is how do we break down some of these barriers of entry and get more people, that are maybe a little disillusioned with, the degree that they paid for, or the job that they had that they thought was their dream job. How do we get more people that are disillusioned with what they're doing and dissatisfied and in a mentally unhealthy place? How do we get them back out on the land with livestock?
Yeah. And I'm a risk taker. I'm not adverse to risk, as evident by, riding steers as a teenager and riding mountain bikes in my 20s, and, hucking myself off things, or my interest in entrepreneurial endeavors. But with my lack of fear of risk, I am trying to create these safer opportunities for people to get involved, whether it's the internship program where someone can learn on my dime, they can come learn from my mistakes, or in a sense of a family being able to get involved first by buying into my herd, but maybe that's their first step into experiencing, following along, learning, until the point where they can make a transition onto living on a rural property. And I think the biggest thing is just breaking down the barrier of money and finance. There's so many ways to find a little bit of cash to get going. And there's so many ways to avoid the expenses that are just assumed when we think about agriculture, because we're so accustomed to an industrial model that is so heavy on infrastructure. But there are so many workarounds that, just by being creative and by networking with people who are doing innovative things, that we can find these models. And that's where Joel Salatin has always been a leader of saying that it's an open opportunity for anyone to get into this industry, and breaking down those barriers. So I think that's super important for anyone who's interested in this. But again, the number one thing, just going back to what I said a little while ago, is being a customer first. And anyone who's a customer and a vocal customer and an advocate of this industry, that is absolutely the first step. And we need more customers, and we need more loud vocal people to spread awareness, because I say it like around the education. So if I can get 100 school age children to my farm, I don't expect they're all going to become farmers, but I do expect that all of them are going to think about that experience when they're older. I bet that 20% of them at some point in their life are going to think about an experience on the farm, and they're going to grow a little bit of their own food, or they're going to think twice about what they eat. And I bet, 1% or 3% of them at some point in their life will be working, producing food in the food industry based on their interest sparked on my farm. And I bet 0.5% of those will become some of the best farmers in our area. And so it's just a matter of running the cycle of putting regenerative agriculture through people's minds, and the awareness that we have to do.
That 1 in 100 sales conversion rate.
Yeah. because right now, the industrial organic industry is what, like 1.5% of the entire food market, and regenerative has to be a fraction of that. So
Right.
we have so much work to do just to move it forward. Now, when we go back to the reference of craft beer, I believe it is 30% of the beer market is now craft beer. And so they have gone from nothing to a significant market share. And that's the model we need to follow, is by decentralizing our food systems. And it doesn't have to be all of it, but just increasing how much of our food is produced in a better way.
Like, you might raise the best chicken, pork, and turkey on Vancouver Island. And I'll
I
have to take
absolutely
your
say I
word
do.
for it, because there's probably, you know, between here and there, I could drive an hour your direction and find pastured poultry, pastured turkey, and pastured pigs. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your meat, but why would I buy yours? Buy the stuff close to home. And that's what we encourage everybody to do, is buy local, eat local, shop local. The asterisk there is, but don't be afraid to take advantage of the system as it currently exists.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing about where I come into this, is that I'm not trying to produce all my own feed. I'm not trying to vertically integrate absolutely everything. I'm still buying industrial chicks because I want my customers to compare apples to apples. The same bird they would get in the grocery store is what I raise. Like, I don't need to go into heritage breed poultry. Yeah, of course I have heritage breed sheep and probably cattle, and my pigs are heritage breed, but that's just a bonus because it's available here. The number one thing is for us to take steps towards regenerative, whether it's a conventional farmer who's listening to this, who is thinking I'm crazy because I started from scratch and did everything regenerative. Well, it's a movement, it's a journey, not a destination. And it's taking those steps towards this, and then telling people about it, and conversing about it, talking to old ranchers and farmers about this stuff, talking to new people that know nothing about the ag industry, and just talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. We got to start wrapping this up, man.
For sure. I've definitely enjoyed it. And, talking about it is my favorite thing. Like I mentioned, I'm doing a local radio show. It's called The Tuning Fork. And it's on our nonprofit university radio station, 7 p.m.s Pacific Standard Time on chly.org. And then you can re-listen to old episodes on Mixcloud. And that's a great avenue for me to talk hyper locally about all this stuff.
Can
And
you
then
send me links to Tuning Fork and a Mixed Cloud so I make sure I have the right stuff to put in the show notes?
will do, for sure. And then the international platform that I speak on is Clubhouse, which is this new audio only app. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it, but I am an Android guy, so I have been kind of left out from the whole Clubhouse thing. And I know the app's available on Android now, but I've let it pass me by and just try to focus on my podcast. But so what is Clubhouse?
Clubhouse is like a live podcast. So you go into the platform, and then there's the hallway where there's all these different rooms on different topics. And of course, you can start a room, and then there's clubs. So I'm part of the ag discussion group, which is a bunch of like industrial ag people from all over. And we have really great conversations every single day there. And then Farm to Table Talk, which is another podcast led by Roger Wasson. And he has a room at noon Pacific Standard Time on Clubhouse in the Farm to Table Talk Club. And then the largest food club on the app is Food Growers United. And so it's mostly focused around things like backyard gardening and microgreens and food trucks and urban farming. But there's so much interest from that community, and it's the biggest food club with over 18,000 followers. There's so much interest in what we do from urbanite people who want to talk to us. And so it's this live platform where there's people on stage, and then there's the audience. And when you're in the audience, you can raise your hand to be brought up on stage. and when you're in when you're on stage, you can invite people up to the stage, and we can just have these really interesting conversations in kind of a live, casual, audio-based platform, which is wonderful for you and I when we're out in the pasture and we got our headphones in, but can't be looking at something, reading something, or typing something. So it's just a great place to hang out when you're not listening to the Ranch and Reboot podcast.
I like that.
And when I'm basically, when I can't find a room because there's no good farm rooms, when all the rooms are about the Kardashians and what Elon Musk is up to, then I hop back into my podcasts.
I don't know if I'm pretty much an introvert. Like, I don't know if I could handle that much interaction while I'm trying to be out by myself with the cows, even if it's just a little bit of audio. So, and schedules for things like that. Like, I have a hard enough time sticking to a recording schedule. Like, well, we got to go do this podcast thing. Like doing a clubhouse room every day at noon. You're probably not going to catch me doing that. So I hope nobody's getting their hopes up for that one.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. It's just a place to hang out. And it's like, I got these relationships with cool people all over. Like, Roger recently interviewed Jennifer, who's putting, Ag World Conference on. And, I heard her on the podcast. I was like, oh, what's up? That's my friend Jennifer from Clubhouse. And I got friends all over that I talk to on a daily basis, but it's all casual. Just hop in when I'm available, and otherwise, listen to a podcast or just listen to the cows and I might listen to my sheep chomp on some grass.
I might have to give that a look. So where else can we find you on social media, Ben?
Instagram and Clubhouse are my two main spots. And so on Clubhouse, you just look up my name, Ben Glassen. And then on Instagram, I'm at Glassen Farms. And then my abattoir business, which I have a landing page for at this point, it's called The Good Place Abattoir, because when the child says, Mom, where are we taking our birds? Well, honey, we're taking them to the good place. Or when one mom's talking to the other mom, hey, where are you getting that good meat from? Well, I get it from the good place.
That's good. I like it.
Good food comes from good places. And when our animals have a good life, they only have one bad day, but they're going to a good place to do it.
I like that. So that was thegoodplace.ca?
It's thegoodplaceabattoir.com.
All right. I think I got that scribbled down. Did I forget to ask anything I should have?
I don't think so. I've sure had a lot of fun with this. And, as I say, I'm still, an old lady at the farmer's market, I told her, I've just set a new goal that I need my red meat plant to be open by June of 2025. So that allows me to work backwards to start raising beef to process in that plant. She's like, oh, I just can't believe how far in advance you're planning. And I'm like, lady,
that's only
I'm trying to
years.
plan. Yeah, I'm like, that's still the first couple chapters. I'm trying to build a 40-year farming career here. Like, give me a break.
And planning to slaughter something in 2025, that's a breeding decision right now.
Sure is.
You got to find your open cow and you got to figure out your bull and you got to put them together in just a couple of months in order to have that product in 2025.
Yeah. So, one influencer that I really like on the macro scale of marketing is Gary Vaynerchuk. And, it takes a little bit to understand what his message is, but his biggest message is patience. It's being patient and being humble. Like, he sounds like he's like this all bravado, New Jersey rah kind of guy, but his theory is work hard and fast as right now, but have patience for the long game. So that's what agriculture is all about, is we have the long game in mind. We are planning in the far distant future, but we are working our butts off as fast as possible today in order to reach that.
And we have to look at it from the long game. We cannot take a short-sighted approach anymore to agriculture. We cannot afford to take a short-sighted approach to agriculture anymore. Our soils cannot afford it. Our health, our human health can't afford to take a short-sighted approach to animal health, to soil health, and to human nutrition anymore. We can't keep trading this short-term comfort, this short-term pleasure, and kicking a can down the road. Sooner or later, there's a little pain, there's a little discomfort that we're going to have to endure.
Absolutely. That reminds me, on the radio show, my vegetable farming friend Jake Thorburn, he said something along the lines of, an old farmer would say, success in farming is having enough to farm again next year. And that seems so much like the old mentality that get big or get out has created, where the best a farmer can do is hope that they can still be in business next year. Whereas, reflecting on that statement that Jake made, I thought that his and my model of farming is so opposite of that. We are creating abundance for generations to come. And we are doing that with really high quality food and respecting the three pillars of, the sustainability industry being, social health, in the fact that we're creating jobs both for ourselves and for our community. We are creating health for our community. We are creating environmental health, and we're creating an economic stable platform for us to live on. So, I think that this regenerative movement, and Brian, I really appreciate what you guys are doing by a modern twist on it. Everything from your punk rock beat intro to just the format of this long form podcast, to just both you and CK are just, personable, interesting people that just lay it out, and in a way that people can really get attached to and learn about this movement and participate with it.
I think C carries the personality part of it a lot better than I do. But I appreciate your compliments, and there are a lot of great podcasts out there. Podcast period, but just regenerative podcasts. There's some other great ones, and I'll be honest, I'll admit I don't listen to very many other ones anymore because I don't want to be derivative. I do look at what everybody else is doing for guest lists to make sure that that Clay Connery guy on the Working Cows podcast has sniped guests from me more than once that I've been about ready to send an email to, and he releases an episode, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll just put that one back to the back of the pile and come back in about 6 months. But Clay and I will have it out one day over that. I'll probably not. He's kind of the pod father, and he gets to do whatever he wants, I think.
Well, I mean, he led me to you, which was a good thing. And as he says, there's so much room for more grazing podcasts because everyone's going to take a different angle on it. And that's where, he takes it from the family man and the preacher perspective, whereas I feel like you and CK take it from a kind of new, young, modern way, ranching reboot. But then I just found, what is it called? Grazing pastures, which is more of like, I don't know. I haven't even gotten into it, but it's such a different vibe. And my favorite podcast of all is probably the Pasture Pod, which is this like UK hilarious, just this insane man who goes off on pasture obsession. And it is my favorite. So check that one out if you haven't, even just get an episode in. But no matter what way these podcasts go, I think there's so much room for guests to say different things on different podcasts. And that's the fun of it, is because I cannot wait for another Greg Judy podcast to come out, because there hasn't been one for a while. So, if you can get Greg Judy on, I will be very happy.
Take note to self, email Greg Judy tonight to get on podcast. And I'll probably forget to do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to go on every single one of his videos for the last month, and I'm going to post, get on this podcast.
Hey, that now you're talking. So you mentioned the intro music, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've used that intro music now for 42 episodes plus a couple bonuses, and I haven't really given credit to where credit is due for that music. The intro music is courtesy of the Aaron Traffis Band. My good friend Aaron Traffis literally lives on the other side of the county. He started to get into regenerative ag. He's had a band with several other gentlemen that I knew, and they've been playing music together for over 20 years. So when I was starting up a podcast, I asked Aaron, is like, hey, could I use some of your music for an intro or outro? And he sent me some samples. One I liked, and he's like, well, go ahead, use that one. I wrote it, or Chris and I wrote it. You can use it. Great. And I've forgotten to give Aaron Traffis and Chris Gehring credit for the music to Red Dirt Sun, which is the intro and the outro music. So I'll make sure that gets like a little bit more prominent in the future. But yeah, so
well, that's wonderful. It set the mood. And for me, being, when I was a mountain biker, I was all black every day, tight jeans, a studded belt, and Vans shoes. And going back to, the metal and punk rock that I listened to then, that intro on a regenerative ranching podcast, just, oh man, it hit my soul. And it's like my generation of millennials that we need to get in this movement to be the farmers to fill the shoes of all those who are retiring. And so that's what we need more of, is getting young people interested in farming. And I think that intro and your podcast is doing that.
Well, thanks for that. I will, I'll get my friend Aaron and see if I can't, I'll make sure I get the album name right. And I'll send you a link to that album. I think you'd probably dig it.
Perfect.
So probably going to end right about here. And we've been talking about Red Dirt Sun, and maybe in the background, you can hear it going. So enjoy it for another few seconds. Ben, I really appreciate you joining me today. It's been an awful lot of fun.
Thanks, Brian. Can't wait to be back once I got some more updates and move this blueprint into the field.
That'd be great. I'm looking forward to it. We'll have to sit down here in another few months and get an update from you. Well, gang, y'all have a great week. I'm Red Hills Rancher, out.